Sue, you've moved now to, well, tell us where you are now, because you were a Pacific Northwest person for a long, long time.
I was at Highline College, just down the road for 20 years, and we now live in Las Cruces, New Mexico.
Yeah, so...
and a collective gasp just went up around the room.
Has anybody ever been there? Oh,
yay.
Look at that. Well, I wanted, when I found out that Sue was planning to come here, I just wanted to spend some time talking to her about intro psych, because Sue, would you say that you are early career, mid-career, or late career right now?
I am so late career.
Are you thinking about retiring anytime soon, or what's your plans with that?
Well, I officially retire from Highline in September.
Okay.
And I'm, the teaching has definitely been dialed back. I'll be teaching part-time probably. I'm teaching a class right now face-to-face for New Mexico State. And I might continue teaching online for various community colleges up here in the Pacific Northwest. We'll see. So what that looks like, I don't know. I'm not teaching this fall. I've got a social psych textbook I'm in the midst of revising. So that's my fall goal, is to get that finished.
So if you haven't heard Sue speak at TIP Northwest or elsewhere, one of the things, Sue is also a past STP president, and also a winner of the distinguished G. Stanley Hall. Nope, not G. Stanley Hall. We don't say his name anymore. Hold on. Brewer. The Brewer Award. Oh boy. Let's just edit that.
Not saying that I'm not worthy of the other awards. I just have not
right.
won them yet.
Right. Those are coming. Yeah. So anyway, Sue definitely has a really unique take on the introductory psychology course, and so many people have found her ideas helpful. And so we wanted to have this conversation to talk about, after a career of teaching intro psych and now co-authoring her first textbook with Flat World, what kinds of takeaways, I'll call it wisdom, you don't have to call it that, but what are the kinds of things that she has learned and valued and learned to value about the introductory psychology course? So first of all, Sue, could you just tell us the story that you told me at lunch about meeting somebody and about their intro psych experience?
Yeah, this was just a few weeks ago. I was at an event and met a person there. She's a social worker who's working in a hospice program. And she came back to school as an adult student, a non-traditional student, started at a community college, and she took intro psych. And when she found out that I was a psychology professor, she said, wow, I loved my intro psych class. It was the first one I ever took, and I still remember. I remember Freud, I remember Erikson, and that's where she stopped.
So how do you process when you hear that? Well, actually, I didn't hear this part of the story. What did you say?
She was a good talker. So she just leapt right past that and talked about what she did and how she was loving the hospice program and how she had previously been in corrections and how she came to hate that. So I never came back around and said, let's talk about your intro psych class some more. No.
Yeah. Well, so what did you pick up in that moment? Because I know you have an ear for these. I think you're probably in those kinds of conversations. You're trying to figure out what kind of meaning, or more than meaning, but what kind of learning had been done in an intro psych course. What kind of shocked you about that answer?
Well, first, we've often had conversations about, well, what is it that we want our intro psych students to know 10, 15, 20 years later? And to have someone tell me, this is what I remember 15 years later, it was a little jarring. I think we can do better than Freud and Erikson. I had a student who I would frequently see on the Highline campus. He worked on campus, and 8 years after he had taken my class, he said, I still remember how the neuron works. I remember the action potential. Well, I'm not sure that that's my main takeaway for my course, and so I had to really step back and think about, is that what I really want? So that's been my crisis my entire career.
Well, so did this kind of journey towards more, I would say that your perspective now on intro psych is very much applied. I think you have a neighbor thing you can tell us about, but was that one of the like pivotal moments for you, talking to that student and saying, I don't think that's it?
Well, that certainly, so by the time that I'd heard from this former student of mine that he really remembered the neuron well, like, okay, well, I'm happy for you. I hope there are some other things that you've taken away from the course. And I had already moved past that at that point. I had already had my big crisis moment where I looked at my final and I had a question about the action potential on my final. And I thought, is this really what I want students to walk away with? So I decided it was not, and it really caused me to rethink the course and what I was trying to accomplish. So the neighbor thing that you alluded to, I need an audience. Other than all of you are great as an audience. The Tip Northwest audience is great, but for me, teaching intro psych, I needed to have in mind who it is I am teaching. And I've talked with many psychology instructors who say, I'm teaching for the major. And they've actually said, I can't teach for anybody else. I'm teaching intro psych for the major. And as we all know, I'm seeing lots of nods in the audience, that as we know, most of our students are not psychology majors. I thought it was pretty good that Bridget had 20% majors and minors. I don't. Mine come in closer to 5 to 10%. So it's for everybody else. And I know Dave Myers, when he talks about writing his textbook, he's thinking about what an educated person needs to know about psychology. And I really appreciated that, and I've used Dave's book for, well, my entire career until this past January. And nothing against Dave, love Dave, good friend. But I needed an audience that was a little bit more specific than the educated person. So I started thinking about my neighbors. And when I lived in Renton, Washington, I had a lot of neighbors who had gone to college. So I had a Boeing engineer on my block. I had plenty of computer code writers on my block. I had a guy who ran his own construction business. I had high school teachers. I had people who worked in healthcare. And it occurred to me that all of these people, many of them, had probably taken intro psych. We know intro psych is one of the most popular classes to take. So chances were good that they had taken it. Well, what is it that I want them to know about intro psych? So that's how I came to thinking about my neighbors. What is it that my neighbors need to know about psychology? So I write for them.
So what kinds of things do you think your neighbors don't need to know about psychology? Another way I would ask that is, like, what sorts of things, when you decided to to really have your audience in mind, what did you let go of? Because we often talk about in intro psych, there's so much content, it's probably a disservice to your students if you're trying to do it all, especially in a quarter system like we have, but probably is. It's just so hard. And you high school teachers who do it all, you're amazing. Like, I think you're the best teachers. I've worked with a lot of you all at the AP reading.
Yeah.
We both have.
Yeah.
And so you have this, you don't get a choice necessarily, right? Because you're prepping them for this exam. But for those of us who do have a choice, I think letting go of content can allow us to go deeper into what we find to be the most meaningful parts. So how did this turn out for you? What did you start letting go of?
The easiest thing for me to let go of was a lot of the history. I know that I know that as a discipline, we love our history, but do my neighbors need to know about structuralism and functionalism? Okay, the general response from the audience was, no, they don't need to know about structuralism and functionalism. So I was happy to let that go. When I was working on this intro psych textbook, I thought, okay, so first I told my publisher, okay, I want to remove history psych from the first chapter because I've been talking for about 10 years about we can let the history go. We got anything. I had a great quote on my office door for years. I don't remember the source of it, and of course I don't remember the exact quote, so I have no idea where this came from, so my apologies to whoever it was who came up with this. Email me, and I'll be sure to credit you properly, which means all of you could just take credit and that'd be fine. So it basically said, whatever it is that you choose to cover in your course, you are also choosing not to cover something else. Our time is finite. So everything we cover, we're not covering something else. The personality psychologists, as part of a task force that Society for the Teaching of Psychology did in coordination with the Division I General Psychology, we asked a bunch of researchers, what is it people need to know? The personality researchers came back and said, can you please stop talking about pre-World War II theories of personality? There's a lot more stuff that we do as personality psychologists today that's worthy. And as a colleague put it to me, like, well, we could probably also let go the pre-Vietnam War era personality theories as well. So to talk more about today's psychology as opposed to yesterday's psychology. So when I told my publisher I wanted to take the history of psychology out of the book because I've been talking about this, and if I leave it in there, people are going to be like, so I thought you told us to take this out. Why is this in your book? Mm-hmm. And so our compromise is we moved it to an appendix. So it's still there. It's there. If you really want to talk about structuralism, functionalism, knock yourselves out. We should have a conversation about why you think that's important. I would love to have that conversation with you. But anyway, it's there. But then I thought, okay, there must be some history, though, that is really valuable. So I went to my favorite psychology historians, Barney Bynes, Ken Keith, and Linda Wolf. And I asked them, what is it that my neighbor needs to know about the history of psychology? And they said, and they were almost unanimous, they said, okay, Wundt. But with Wundt, it's not so much the first psychology lab, although we've all dutifully memorized that. It's that he brought experimental methods to psychology. That's the important part about Wundt. So, okay, I'll write that. They said, you also need to include Kenneth and Mimi Clark, that they've got to be there. So I did some additional research, and Loretta McGregor, who's coming up as a STP president next year, she did a wonderful chapter on Mimi Clark that was really, really helpful. But here's the thing. So we all know about, this is getting to be a long story.
No, please, that's great.
Yeah, because now you're like, well, what happened? So we all know about the doll study, right? Okay, and that might be the only thing most of us know. And it was the big thing that I knew. Well, here's what I did not know, which is way more important. So, so the Clarks did their doll study, and Thurgood Marshall, who would later become a member of the Supreme Court, he was the lead attorney for the NAACP. And he's preparing for Brown versus Board of Education. So he knows the Clarks. I didn't know this. Mamie used to be a paralegal. Anyway, so Thurgood Marshall goes to the Clarks and said, can you rerun the doll study? That was a number of years ago now. Is this data still current? The Clarks said, sure. They rerun the doll study. Thurgood Marshall takes that data, He uses it as part of his argument before the Supreme Court, and that data was influential. And we know that because in the majority opinion, the person who wrote the majority opinion specifically mentioned the Dahl data. That's the important thing about the Clarks. I also did not know that Mamie Clark then went on to, at some point, found a children's organization in Harlem, and that organization still exists, and they've got an annual budget in the millions. So that's what we need to know. The other thing that Barney, Ken, and Linda, the other person they told me to put in was Lillian Gilbreth. Lillian Gilbreth is, I think one could argue, the founder of industrial organizational psychology. She and her husband were best known for their time studies, which was all about efficiency. They were big time, they had contracts with companies to do this work, to try and make things more efficient at those companies for their employees. Well, he dies. Spoiler, he dies, and she is still pretty young. So she wanted to continue the work, but in this time period, the early part of the 20th century, all the contractors said, no, screw you. So she loses all of those contracts, and she's like, well, I still got time. So she goes into the kitchen. Like, all right, the women are gonna listen to me. She redesigns the kitchen. The L-shaped kitchen that you now have, that was her. Shelving in your refrigerator, that is her. If you have that separate little butter dish thingy, butter compartment in your refrigerator, that's Lillian Gilbreth. The step-on trash can, where you step on the pedal and it lifts up, that was her. And it had nothing to do, I think now we think of it as hygiene, but for her, no, it was just greater efficiency. You're carrying something that needs to go in the trash, you step on the, so all of that was Lillian Gilbreth. I had a student who, in a discussion board, I asked them, so what was the most interesting thing in this chapter? And the student said, that history section. And she specifically talked about Lillian Gilbreth. She said, when I think of psychology, I think of a handful of things, undoubtedly therapy related. And she said, this made me realize exactly how broad and how impactful psychology is. Thank you, Terry. Terry said that is awesome. And that's exactly what I wanted to accomplish with that history section.
Sue, as we just have a few minutes left, and I just want to say that one of the things I love about you and the way that you teach is that you have given so many people permission to break the rules, the self-imposed, imposed by content, imposed by 16 chapters. You've given people permission to break those rules and teach the courses, I feel like, teach the courses that only they can teach. And the way that you've done that is to give students a real world, and I think we all value this, like this real world application of psychology that can change and better their lives. Do you want to just kind of end our time, and I think you've touched on it already, but just talk about what should the introductory psychology course do for a student?
This question you asked with 5 minutes left?
Yeah, like 3 minutes probably. Yeah.
Three minutes.
Yeah.
Minute and a half. The longer I stall,
yeah,
the shorter time I get.
And I should mention that Sue is part of the group that wrote the new APA Student Learning Outcomes for the Introductory Psychology Initiative. So you had a lot of these conversations of like, what should this course do? You know, for that student who's only ever going to take one psychology course, and it's your course, what do you want it to do for them?
The biggest thing is that they know something about today's psychology. Obviously I'm not completely anti-history. I think we just need to be more selective in the history that we share and why and what we want it to accomplish. As instructors, I think we all need to be thinking about our own student population and what is it that they really need to know. Next time you teach intro, I'll encourage you, as you look at each chapter that you're going to be covering, to take a good look at that and say, do my students need to know that? Some of the content that is in our psychology books are, here's this historical piece, and then here's everything that's wrong with it. And this is why we don't follow this anymore. Well, if we're not following it anymore, why is it in there in the first place? And we're asking students, well, we ask students, here, memorize Freud's psychosexual stages. And even if we're really clear in saying, yeah, modern day psychology, no, we don't follow this anymore, but here, memorize these, and because I'm going to ask you about them on the test. Like, well, why? Why are we doing that? So I think all of us have a really good idea as to what we want to cover in the course. We know who our neighbors are. We know what it is they need to know. And yes, I'm going to give you permission to dump content and to add stuff that is today's psychology that you think is really valuable for them.
One thing that we've talked about before is, I think as teachers, we're sometimes confused as to why some of this content remains in all of our introductory psychology books. We've talked about this a lot. It's our fault. It really is. Do you want to tell us why it's our fault?
It is totally our fault. Mm-hmm. So textbook authors, we have an idea as to what we want to put in there. And chapters go out for review. And many of you have probably reviewed chapters for an intro psych text. And you've probably reviewed chapters that were not necessarily your area of expertise. It was probably something you really enjoyed, but not your area of expertise. And part of the problem is that the publishers say, okay, we want you to review 4 chapters. And you're like, well, my expert area is social psychology, so I'll do that. Research methods, I know that pretty well. And then I got to pick 2 others that honestly, I don't know much about, but I like them. And so we review those chapters and we say, okay, you got to keep this content because I teach this. Which is, okay, great, I'm happy for you, but you shouldn't have an opinion. This is a chapter that you're not an expert in, and so why are you saying you got to keep this? So as textbook authors, we then have a battle with our publishers because even though we've heard from experts in that area who have said, no, you can take it out, which is where the whole action potential business comes from, actually. Biopsychologists, a lot of them say, you can take out the action potential because I see biopsychologists nodding, you can take that out because the real juice for us is in the synapse. It's the neurotransmitters. Put all your energy there. Forget about goddamn action potential. So we can do that. We can take that out. But when everybody else who are not biopsychologists say, no, you got to keep it in there. You got to keep the action potential because I teach that. Then as authors, we're kind of stuck because the publisher is saying, if we take out the action potential, all of these people are not going to adopt the book. So the action potential stays.
Yeah.
So it's our fault.
So it is our fault, and puts publishers and authors in just into a no-win kind of situation, right? And so it's really cool, though. I think the way the textbooks are going now, that you can, especially ebooks, that you can really easily cut content, right?
Yep.
And so it's a kind of a nice way that this is turning out. Anyway, Sue. Thank you. Thank you so much for talking to me. Yeah, go ahead. Give her a round of applause. We hope you'll come visit at some point in the future, but all our best to you as you kind of reach a semi-retirement.
I've been saying that I was pre-semi-retired, and then I'm headed towards semi-retirement, and then I look at everything that I've got on my list of things to do, and I'm like, no, I'm just differently employed.
It's true.
It is true.
Yeah. Thanks, Sue.
Thanks, Garth.